Today's video is going to be a different topic, and this is a topic which I wanted to talk about for quite a while actually, ever since I got back to Assassin's Creed Origins back in 2018 and witnessing how the franchise has basically lost its identity, and this goes further into how Ubisoft has lost its identity as a trend-setting company within the video games industry. Now, once upon a time, Ubisoft used to be a trendsetter in the games industry, with most notably the Assassin's Creed franchise, especially Assassin's Creed 2 Brotherhood and even Assassin's Creed 3 to a certain extent. Now, to just give you a brief overview, AC2 was a huge improvement over its predecessor AC1, while AC3 was a huge technological leap when it came to the franchise and most notably the scope of the Assassin's Creed games. AC3 had two big cities and a huge open world or open level playground which was called the Frontier, and there weren't a lot of buildings in there, which of course were the fundamental aspects of the parkour system in Assassin's Creed, but instead they were replaced by trees. And I would say one of the biggest problems with Assassin's Creed 3 and where the downfall of the franchise has actually started is that the game was too ambitious and it ended up being released unfinished. And you can clearly see this with the remaster of the game, which I have played a few months ago, and it was clearly apparent that they had to cut out a lot of story beats, a lot of dialogues, and a lot of missions in order to make the deadline, and you can actually still feel that the game has this need of polish. But one of the biggest hurdles that Ubisoft has faced with the Assassin's Creed IP or franchise was back in 2014. Well, I personally wasn't really into Assassin's Creed. I played Black Flag and I really enjoyed it, but I wasn't really into the franchise ever since I was so disappointed with AC3. But in 2014, Assassin's Creed Unity has launched, and it was basically one of the biggest meme of 2014, and I believe that it still is because the game is still not fixed, not even on PS4. That game launched, crashed, and burned. And just a year after that, or barely half a year after that in 2015, a little game called Witcher 3 has launched and basically changed the landscape of gaming. And through that, the publishing company or the developers behind it, CD Projekt Red, that is, became a trendsetter in the video games industry. Now, Ubisoft has been trying to emulate The Witcher 3 ever since it came out, and I believe this was one of the biggest influences alongside the crashing and burning of AC Unity that actually forced Ubisoft to become a trend follower due to the astronomical success of The Witcher 3 back in 2015. But an important thing would be to note, and which was the catalyst for this video, is that with Cyberpunk, CD Projekt Red has actually noted that The Witcher 3 story was too long, as not a lot of players actually finished The Witcher 3 story, as it's like 50 hours long or something crazy like that. And they have cut down the story, according to howlongtobeat.com, to 20 hours when it came to Cyberpunk. And I was absolutely pleasantly surprised that they had the guts to pull this creative decision, that they did not want to tell a 40-50 hour story within the universe, but just a kind of self-contained and enjoyable 20-hour story, which didn't really drag out for long. But on the other hand, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the latest entry to the franchise from Ubisoft, of course, came out in 2020, the same year as Cyberpunk. But the story of AC Valhalla is about 3 times as long as Cyberpunk's, which is around 60 hours. But I've made a whole video about the story and how much of the story of AC Valhalla is filler. I will link the video down in the description down below. And from that video, I was kind of inspired to point out the fact that players want quality content, not necessarily quantity over quality. And The Witcher 3 was the only exception, as far as I can tell, in the last like half a decade, where it had both a lot of missions and a lot of quality stuff alongside it as well, and I also made a video about it. I will link that down in the description down below as well, why players actually love The Witcher 3. And one of the biggest takeaways for me is that the game has respected my time, even though I spent like 400 hours in the game. I always felt like I was getting my time's worth and it was worth playing the game over and over again. And the same cannot be said for the new Assassin's Creed games, to be perfectly honest with you. And the biggest question that I would have is whatever happened to Ubisoft and the identity of the Assassin's Creed franchise? Because Assassin's Creed was one of the most unique intellectual properties in gaming, and it was changed from one of these unique experiences to a generic open world game with RPG elements, while lately they have integrated previous elements from the Assassin's Creed games such as social stealth and some lore regarding the Assassin's Creed universe, but it's mostly background stuff and it's not really at the forefront of the new Assassin's Creed games. And I feel like that the Ubisoft executives have learned the wrong lessons from Assassin's Creed Unity, as with the release of AC Unity, Assassin's Creed sales have basically tanked. And I feel like that the wrong conclusion was that players were getting tired of this Assassin's Creed formula or having an Assassin's Creed game every year, and they believed that they had to change this in order to appeal to the players. But I feel like that the exact opposite is true, as players weren't necessarily getting tired of the Assassin's Creed formula, but they were getting tired of broken and unfinished games. And at that time, Ubisoft also didn't focus on what made Ezio the poster boy of the franchise and why he still is the poster boy of the franchise, and that is character development, and that players and just people in general attach themselves to characters much more than they attach themselves to stories, because you can identify with a character like Ezio pretty easily, to be perfectly honest, and he had a trilogy of games, so therefore we could follow Ezio's journey throughout 3 games. And I feel like this was one of the biggest mistakes that they have made with the new games, is there was always a new protagonist, always a new setting, whereas you couldn't necessarily identify with the characters as much as people would have liked to. And to just give Ubisoft a bit of a suggestion, in order to return to what Assassin's Creed as a franchise was always meant to be, I would say that releasing or just having an Assassin's Creed game every year could be a potential possibility in the form of what EA did with the Star Wars games. Whereas in 2020 they have released a smaller game which was much more gameplay focused, which Assassin's Creed purists have been crying out for, as the major elements of the games like the parkour system has been neglected to the point where it's just dreadful to use in the new games. And this game would be much more gameplay focused. It would rather please the hardcore audience, but it would be something along the lines of Star Wars Squadrons, where it would be around like a $40 game and it was much more story and gameplay focused. And another opportunity would be to have this game come out in 1 year, and in the next year you could have your big epic game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Assassin's Creed Origins. And I believe this way both the hardcore fans would be much willing to play the bigger games and would be much more satisfied with the IP as a whole. As this way, both the hardcore fans and the general audience would be pleased with the Assassin's Creed name in general. And anyways, I hope you have enjoyed the video, and if you have any thoughts regarding the matters I have discussed, please feel free to share them in the comments down below. Subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching. And until next time, remember to keep it insightful.